Daniel Harris, good morning to you.
Hiya.
We were at the top of the show reflecting on what a great 24 hours it's been for Arsenal.
I think the thing with Arsenal is in some ways they remind me of where United were a year ago, where their best level, their best performance is a pretty good level. The problem they have is they need to raise that bottom level. Their bottom level is still pretty poor. But when Arsenal play well, they've got some really good players, and they're a difficult night for anyone, because what they effectively do is they're quite organised at the back. They don't have great defenders, but they defend deep and they defend in numbers. And going forward, they've got players that are good enough to give any defence aggravation. And when those players play well, then Arsenal are a pretty good team.
How does that bottom level raise itself up over the next season, Daniel, without the obvious signing extra players or finding extra budget?
I think they've got a manager who got the job without any experience, pretty much. There was no real reason to think that Mikel Arteta would be any good, other than a hunch or this one, or a little bit of practice with Pep Guardiola. So he's been learning on the job, and he's going to get a lot better. Even if he's not a particularly good manager, he's still going to get a lot better, because he was starting from a very low base. So it's not just about the players improving, I don't think. It's about the manager learning how to manage and how to coach, and the people around him doing the same. So I think that's going to make a massive difference. He's going to understand better what his job is, and he's going to understand his players better as well. But also they've got a lot of young players. Their best players are young players, which is unusual. And those players also have a huge ceiling. I mean, you do get some young players, and I think like Wayne Rooney was one of them, where they're so good when they're young that they don't actually improve that much, because it's not possible for them to improve that much. And you look at Bukayo Saka and think, well, really, how much better can you get? Because he's so good already. But there are players around him who are going to improve. Emile Smith-Rowe is going to get better. I think with him in particular, he's someone you look at and think that if Arsenal are going to be a serious team, he needs to work on his numbers, because ultimately most good teams don't play with a number 10. And I think one of the reasons is because in order to have a number 10, you need numbers from that player in the end. Like start leading the press, all that kind of thing, generally isn't enough. Like you need goals and you need assists, and he's got quite a lot of work to do in that area. So I think if he's able to do that, then that will make a big difference. Kieran Tierney, if he can stay fit, will make a huge difference as well. He's going to get better. So yeah, I think that they've got quite a lot of room to get better. But as they stand now, as I said, like their top level is a good level.
From a Manchester United standpoint, then, are they the team that potentially worries you the most when it comes to Solskjaer going for the Europa League?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, worried is strong. I think it's cup competition. Look, like United are a much better team than Arsenal. The league table tells you that, and more. But if you look at the games that they played against each other, that tells you that Arsenal are a really difficult matchup for United, because they defend. As I said, they're organised at the back. They defend deep, and United are often criticised for not being able, or finding it difficult to break down organised deep defences, which is sort of a misnomer, I think, because every team finds that difficult. It is difficult. If there are 11 men standing between you and the goal, that's hard to break down. And they have such quality on the counter and such quality going forward that's a bad matchup for United, bad matchup for anyone. So yeah, as a United supporter, I would much rather play Arsenal over two legs, because over two legs you would expect the better team to win, and that is United. Whereas in a final, Arsenal have more than enough to beat United. United have lost to much worse teams than Arsenal. So yeah, I mean, I think that Arsenal will probably beat Villarreal, but it would be very Arsenal to go and lose to Unai Emery in the semi.
It certainly would. Last week we were talking about what Manchester United should potentially do with Jesse Lingard. This week it seems that the conversation is around Edinson Cavani. What's your stance on what would be the best outcome for Manchester United in terms of their relationship?
I don't think United have much choice in that one. They want Cavani to stay. Why would they not want Cavani to stay? And he'll either decide to stay or he'll decide to leave. But absolutely the best option for United is Cavani staying, because, I mean, the first thing is he's still really good. The difficulty with Cavani is he's not been fit as often as United would like. But if you look at the areas in which United would like to strengthen in the summer, they'd like a centre-back, probably like a deputy right-back, they'd like a number 6, they'd like a right winger, they'd like a goal scorer. They're not going to get all of those things. And if they do manage to hang on to Cavani, then they might be able to defer the goal scorer for another season, which would enable them to basically have a look at the players that are available. And instead of necessarily going to get a player for a particular position, they might feel more inclined to get players for the position where they think that a player who's good enough is available. So Cavani would take a bit of the pressure off to go and find the goal scorer. If Cavani leaves, United will feel much more that they needed to get a number 9. And if Cavani stays, they might feel that they could strengthen the other areas and worry about number 9 in another year, depending on how well Mason Greenwood's doing in that position. But if Cavani leaves, I don't think United will feel that they can just let Martial and Greenwood play there, and that would be sufficient.
Is it a case of one or the other, Daniel? Is it like if they keep Cavani, they're not getting Haaland, for example, or a top level striker? Like, is that the clear signal? So. If he stays, that's it?
No, I don't think so. I think that if United decide they want Haaland and they can sign Haaland, then you drop everything that you're doing in order to go and get Haaland, because that's how good he is. I think that United's transfer plans for the summer probably hinge to significant extent on whether they can get Haaland, because if they can get Haaland, then it's not going to matter about Cavani, because you're buying one of the best strikers in the world for the next few years. I think that the Haaland question is slightly different, because they might think, well, they don't want a situation where you buy a player and he stays for 3 years and then he goes and there's agitation at that point because they're trying to build a team. So I think that they might decide that I guess at that point you're in a good position. Like whether if Haaland decides he wants to come to United, I think it seems quite unlikely. But if he decides he wants to come to United, then you're in a good position. And I don't think United necessarily say, well, that they feel that they can do without him. But I think, so if Haaland decides he's coming, then you drop everything else and you get Haaland, and then you deal with everything else after that.
Daniel, this morning there's been some new Paul Pogba stuff. I'm sure you've seen Sky Sports are speaking to him before the game against Burnley at the weekend. For people who've missed this, they've put out a bit of it on social media. He said, once I had a great relationship with Jose Mourinho, the next day I didn't know what happened. What I have now with Ole is different. He wouldn't go against the players. I haven't actually seen it myself, Daniel. If you have it, maybe enlighten us, but if not, no worries. This kind of, I guess, underlines maybe what people suspected about the Pogba-Jose relationship.
I honestly, if you can probably tell by the state of my kipper, I haven't seen it because I was in the pub last night.
Good man.
It was quite emotional, actually.
We're very envious. What was that like?
It was, honestly, it was quite moving. I was in the cab on the way there, and just it was quite a nice day in London yesterday, and so you could see people sitting out, and you might ordinarily be driving by thinking, dickheads, or some words to that effect, as you see people enjoying themselves. But I actually found it quite emotional, just driving by everyone sitting out on the streets and then walking into the pub and seeing your mates there. And I'm going to sound like an absolute moron here, and I apologise if it sounds like I'm rubbing your noses in it.
No.
Walking into a pub and seeing a table with your mates, it kind of gets you, I hear.
No, we're with you. We're not. We are a bit jealous, obviously, but we're also we want some of that good stuff. We're not.
Yeah, it was you forget. You obviously you forget how much you adore sitting in the pub with your mates, boozing. Simple pleasures. It sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but yeah. So it is for that reason that I have not seen what Paul Pogba said. But everyone knows what Mourinho is, and I think it's really. I see Mourinho now, and he feels quite sad watching him because he was so brilliant and he's such a genius. But what you see with Mourinho, I think, is that like everyone else, he has good points and he has bad points. But it seems like the bad points have consumed the good points, and so he still has the charisma, and you see every now and again just those little signs of what a brilliant man he is. But most of the time, it's just the grousing, and the way that he treated Pogba was wrong. And you can understand that Pogba might have been difficult to manage at some point, and in some ways he's quite different to what Mourinho's like. But the thing with Mourinho, I think, is that he only has one speed, and he's brilliant with certain types of personality, and that kind of, I guess you might call it alpha male kind of personality, agitating people like Frank Lampard and John Terry and Didier Drogba, manically, maniacally driven athletes to do what they can. Then you see someone like Paul Pogba, who is a bit more laid back. And he loves football, Paul Pogba. So, and that the kind of things people think he doesn't care. It's complete nonsense. You see the shape that he's in. You see the way that he plays, the fact that when he's not playing, he's kicking about with his mates. Paul Pogba loves football. The thing about Paul Pogba is he doesn't have the natural intensity, I don't think, as a bloke. He's just a laid-back kind of bloke, and he needs to find that intensity from somewhere. And the way that you get the intensity out of Paul Pogba isn't the way that Mourinho got it out of the players who were best under him. Paul Pogba needs to love what he does, and that's how you get the intensity. Like you saw, for example, when he came off the bench against Milan when United were drawing in a tie, and basically behind because Milan had an away goal, and just straight from the beginning he was into it and putting himself about. You saw the way he played against Tottenham the other day, where he was just an absolute giant. And the reason that he's doing that is because he's loving what he's doing. And Mourinho didn't have the interpersonal skills, if you want to talk like an HR idiot. He didn't have the interpersonal skills to be able to do that. And Fergie, for example, like for all the football stuff, Fergie was a human resources genius. And that was why he was able to do that. And Ole is brilliant like that as well. If you hear the way Luke Shaw talks about the contrast between Mourinho and Ole, he's another one, Luke Shaw, who needs to feel loved and needs to feel safe and able to express himself rather than have someone dissing him in the press all the time. And that's the difference between Ole and Mourinho. The players are really happy, and you're seeing the way that they're able to perform, that they're not scared to go out and express themselves because they know that most of the time, even if it doesn't work, the manager might have at them in private, but he's not going to diss them in public, and he's not going to shame them. Whereas Mourinho, when the team do well, he basically is sort of likely to take the credit. When they do badly, he'll blame everyone apart from himself. And that whole thing when he said like same players, same manager, different players the other day, what he didn't understand was that in saying that, he was actually insulting himself, because he thought that he was dissing the players and saying, well, it's those guys' fault. I managed to get these players to do that. But the actual situation is that he managed to get those players, like the Inter players that he had, for example, to do what they did because they were those kind of players. Now he has different players and he's trying to make them do what he did at Inter and what he did at Chelsea the first time. He doesn't have the players to do it. So what he actually did was inadvertently showed up, not his methods, and I say this a lot here, that Mourinho's methods aren't outdated, I don't think. If he had the right players for those methods, he'd have a team and the right abilities, he'd have a team that would be near the top of the league. But what he's been trying to do the last few jobs is trying to impose a particular style of play that requires particular ability and particular personality as well, I think. Like, in order to defend 1-goal leads for 45 minutes or whatever, you don't just need to be as good at defending as John Terry and Ashley Cole were. You need that kind of bloody-minded personality as well. He doesn't have either of those things at Tottenham in the same way he didn't have it at United. So, yeah, I think that it is a shame what's happened to Mourinho, but it's not difficult to see why it's that way.
Like sometimes we need to wait for a book to actually have the lid lifted on some of these things. But I think we already have enough evidence, Daniel, that this Jose era at Manchester United was toxic quite a lot of the time. And like even just looking back on that training ground moment between Jose and Pogba in 2018, after he had stripped him of the vice captaincy, like I'd actually forgotten he had stripped him of the vice captaincy up until this morning, like looking back on these quotes. What was the reason behind that? Do you recall?
Why did he take the captaincy off him?
The vice captaincy.
The vice captaincy. I can't remember what he did now.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm feeling slightly cloudy this morning. I can't remember why he did it. But the thing about Mourinho is also that everything is a show.
Yeah.
And that is another situation where it feels like he's making it about him, because he tends to put on that show not in order to take pressure off the team, but to sort of exculpate himself. And where he'll be like, well, look, I'm doing the right thing. And that is the thing with Mourinho, that when you have someone who makes it all about him, it only really works when you're winning. And it's the same with Mourinho kind of football too. Like, it's okay to play 1-0 football if you're winning, but then if you're not winning, it doesn't leave you with very much because it's not entertaining. And Mourinho himself has become a much less entertaining person than he was when he was winning. And he kind of keeps getting these jobs where you think, well, maybe this will be the job because this one feels like his last chance. So when he got the United job, he had a bit of time off. He always wanted the jobs. You thought, well, if he can't change for this, then he's never going to change. He didn't change or get back to old Mourinho. Then I thought it was quite surprising when Spurs got rid of Pochettino to get Mourinho, because I just couldn't see any way that the bloke that they'd appointed was going to be better than the bloke they'd fired. but you're still in the back of your mind thinking, well, this is surely Mourinho's last chance with a job of this magnitude. But here you are. And I think like you're watching, when you support a Mourinho team, in the back of your mind, you know that it's not going anywhere good. So you know that every win, every big win that you get sort of entrenches something that isn't good further into the club. And that is a very frustrating and disconcerting position to be in, where you know that you want your team to win, obviously, but you know that the wins are actually in the long term not necessarily that good for the club.
Yeah, the Pogba stuff was they drew 1-1 with Wolves in the league, and he gave out about their defensive style afterwards. In a move that was, I think, much more reflective of Mourinho. Like Solskjaer would bat that away and say, listen, he's entitled to his opinion. We've seen him do that with players very specifically over the last while. It probably said more about Mourinho than it ever did about Pogba.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'd be less chance that Pogba would say that about Solskjaer, because Solskjaer, number one, he doesn't play like that, but also he has more respect for him. And with Mourinho, I think that it got to a point with those two where they really didn't like each other, and that's no situation for the club, for any club to be in, where the manager and the star player who is worth a lot of money to the club in terms of transfer fees, but also in terms of commercially, where when you have a player like Pogba, I'm sure one of the reasons United sanctioned the move for Pogba was that when you have a load of sponsors, what happens is that it's like people talk about shirt sales and stuff, but that's not really like that. Like, you're not going to make enough money on shirt sales to do anything significant. But what happens is when you have a raft of sponsors, you have to give them players for a certain amount of time in a year or whatever. And if you have a player like Pogba, what happens is all your sponsors, your Mr. Potato Heads, your Turkish Airlines of this world, they go, well, give us Pogba. And because he's the person who has a lot of name recognition. And what United are doing quite well now, I guess, is that they've got a few players like that. Like, you can come, the sponsors are going to come and say, give us Pogba, give us Rashford, give us Bruno. Those people who have recognition around the world, who people want to be associated with. And when you have players like that, they're worth a lot of money to the club commercially. And that's partially how the club sustains itself, but also partially how the owners keep filling their pockets with the club's money. And so when you have Mourinho falling out with Pogba, that creates a toxic environment in the dressing room, but it also creates a big problem for the club more significantly, in that if you think that the clubs exist, United certainly exists as far as the owners are concerned, so basically as an ATM. They can't have a situation where the person who keeps things ticking over in that aspect, Pogba, is giving aggravation to the manager. So it creates a whole host of trouble, and ultimately Pogba won.
We'd Graham Hunter, and I'm only pointing at this. I'm not actually going to ask you about it because we could be here for another half hour. We had Graham Hunter on during the week, and he was talking about liking Zinedine Zidane to Alex Ferguson. And I know that given your comments that you had last week, I'm just flagging up, Daniel. We're coming back to that at some point. Who's going to win the Champions League?
Who is going to win the Champions League? I guess City or Paris. Madrid in a one-off game. Obviously, Madrid have players to beat anyone. So do Chelsea, and you're never quite sure. But I would say like Chelsea actually probably a better matchup for City than Madrid are. I think maybe Madrid are a better matchup for Paris than City are. But I mean, I would expect the winners to come from the City-Paris game. But it's a final, so I think what will happen is that if City play like they played against Dortmund, I think that Paris will probably beat them because they've got better players than Dortmund do. But Paris do need to be more ruthless in front of goal than they were against Bayern, and they did get lucky. Not lucky, but if Lewandowski is fit for that tie, then I'm absolutely sure Bayern sweep Paris aside quite easily in the first game, and they finished the tie in the first game. But that didn't happen, and Paris obviously have the attackers to beat any team, and they're starting to look more like a team. But they've got the defending's a bit better. If they've got Verratti and Paredes fit, then they've got a bit more in midfield than they had last season as well. So that tie will be excellent. I mean, obviously, so much about it makes you remember so much of what's revolting about football and the world. But once they actually get out on the pitch, we're going to remember or forget why that is allowed to happen, because that's how they get away with this stuff, because the football's so good that people sort of forget what's really going on for a minute, because it's impossible not to be absorbed by how good the football is. And I'm sure City and Paris will be a brilliant tie. City are a better team than Paris, but Paris are quite a good matchup for City, because they're a good matchup for anyone. When you have Neymar, Di Maria and Mbappe, you can beat anyone. The question is whether they can get enough of the ball. And I think the thing that City do really well, better than anyone, is that while they're retaining possession, they create chances. And I would expect City to take enough chances, but I think the fact that the first leg is at home is massively in Paris's advantage. It's meant to be an advantage to have the second leg at home, but the way I see it, if Paris get a win in that first leg, then I would fancy them to go through, and they then have 90 minutes to score more away goals than however many City got, and that feels much more like a big advantage, especially when there's no crowd in anyway.
Get the vitamin C into you. Thanks, William.
Yeah, vitamin Alka-Seltzer, exactly that.
Good man. Thanks, William. Daniel, fair play.
Thanks, see you again, lads. Bye, have a good day, everyone.
Daniel Harris on the line there, discussing all things Man United, Champions League, Arsenal, plenty more besides as well. Alan Quinlan on the way very shortly.